The rain had started as a soft mist, the kind Chicagoans barely noticed, but by the time night settled over Michigan Avenue, it had turned cold and relentless. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, stretching long golden lines across the sidewalk like broken promises. Cars rushed past, their tires slicing through puddles, splashing water onto the curb where Nia Johnson stood trembling. She was 19 years old, but the exhaustion in her eyes made her look older. Much older. Nia pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to stop the cold from seeping into her bones. Her diner shift had ended an hour ago, but she had stayed behind to mop floors, hoping for a few extra dollars. Tips had been bad that night. They had been bad for weeks. Still, she told herself every dollar mattered. Because at home, lying in a narrow hospital bed on the west side of the city, her mother was fighting for her life. Nia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She already knew what the message would say. Another reminder from the hospital billing department. Another number she couldn't pay. She didn't check it. She couldn't. If she did, she feared she might stop walking altogether. Her backpack felt heavier than usual as she moved down the sidewalk, stuffed with textbooks, a half-eaten sandwich, and envelopes she was too afraid to open. The pain had started earlier that afternoon, a dull ache in her chest she tried to ignore. She told herself it was stress, or hunger, or both. But halfway down the block, the ache turned sharp. Nia stopped walking. Her breath hitched, and she pressed a hand against her chest as the world tilted slightly to the left. The city sounds blurred, the horns, the footsteps, the distant laughter spilling from a bar down the street. Her vision darkened at the edges. No, not now, she whispered to herself. She took another step, then another, but her legs felt weak, like they no longer belonged to her. A sudden wave of dizziness forced her to lean against a lamppost. Her knees buckled, and she slid down slowly until she was crouched on the wet sidewalk. People passed her. A man in a business suit glanced her way, hesitated, then kept walking. A couple walked around her without breaking stride. Someone muttered something under their breath about people loitering. Nia wanted to scream that she wasn't drunk, that she wasn't lazy, that she wasn't invisible. But all that came out was a faint, broken whisper. "It hurts, sir, please help me." She didn't even know who she was speaking to. Across the street, a sleek black sedan slowed to a stop as the traffic light turned red. Inside sat Jonathan Pierce, staring absently out the window, his thoughts far from Chicago. He had flown in from San Francisco that morning for a charity gala. Another speech, another handshake, another donation with his name carefully removed. Jonathan had mastered the art of looking composed. At 42, the billionaire tech founder wore calm like armor. But tonight, something tugged at his attention. Movement on the sidewalk. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as he spotted a young woman crouched near a lamppost, her shoulders shaking. People were walking past her like she was part of the scenery. Then he heard it. The whisper. It was barely audible through the glass, but it carried a weight that cut straight through him. "It hurts, sir, please help me." Jonathan didn't know why his hand reached for the door handle. He had meetings to attend. Security protocols to follow. A driver who would probably advise against getting involved. But before anyone could stop him, the door opened and the cold air rushed in. "Nathan, wait here," Jonathan said quietly to his driver as he stepped out into the rain. His shoes splashed against the pavement as he crossed the street. The closer he got, the clearer the picture became. The girl, no, the young woman, was soaked, her hands trembling as she clutched her chest. Her face was pale, lips slightly blue, eyes glossy with pain and fear. Jonathan knelt in front of her, ignoring the rain soaking through his coat. "Hey," he said gently. "Can you hear me?" Nia looked up slowly. The world swam back into focus, and she saw a man she didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, concern etched across his face. For a moment she thought she might be hallucinating. I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Jonathan interrupted softly. "Where does it hurt?" She hesitated, pride battling pain. Then her strength gave out. "My chest," she whispered. "And I feel dizzy. I can't afford another hospital bill." The words hit Jonathan harder than he expected. Another bill. How long have you been feeling like this? He asked. All day, she admitted. Maybe longer. I didn't want to stop working. Jonathan glanced around. People were watching now, slowing down, pretending not to stare. He made a decision in a heartbeat. You're not staying out here, he said firmly. I'm getting you help. Nia's eyes widened with fear. No, please, I can't. You can, he said, holding her gaze. And you will. He extended his hand. After a brief hesitation, Nia placed her trembling fingers in his. As he helped her to her feet, a sudden wave of pain ripped through her chest again. She gasped sharply, her grip tightening around his hand. And that's when Jonathan realized something was very wrong. Very wrong. As Jonathan turned toward the waiting car, he noticed a hospital bracelet half hidden beneath Nia's sleeve, old, worn, and faded, and a name printed on it that made his heart stop. Jonathan helped Nia into the back seat of his sleek black car, the warm interior a stark contrast to the icy drizzle outside. She shivered violently, her small frame curled into itself as he wrapped a spare coat around her shoulders. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Don't try to explain yet, Jonathan said softly, starting the engine. Just breathe. The car glided through the rainy streets of Chicago, headlights reflecting off puddles like fragmented stars. Nia pressed her forehead against the window, watching the city blur past, each light a fleeting distraction from the pain in her chest, and from the fear that had been gnawing at her for months. Jonathan stole glances at her. Her pale skin, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched every time the car hit a bump, it all spoke of a life under relentless pressure. He wasn't sure what hit him harder, her vulnerability or the undeniable courage she had to summon just to survive each day. He navigated the car to Mercy General Hospital, one of the few facilities in the city that offered immediate care without requiring upfront payment. As soon as they arrived, he practically carried Nia inside, ignoring the curious stares of night shift nurses and patients waiting in the lobby. I can't afford, she started, her voice weak. Not tonight, Jonathan interrupted. You don't owe anyone anything right now. A nurse rushed over, taking in Nia's condition. Her vital signs were unstable. The young woman's exhaustion was extreme, compounded by malnourishment and dehydration. Jonathan followed silently as the nurse guided Nia into an examination room. Do you have family? The nurse asked, glancing at him. My mother, Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's very sick. Jonathan felt a pang. He remembered his own losses, how grief and responsibility could weigh heavier than anyone could see. He sat beside her, quietly offering support without needing to speak. As doctors ran tests, Nia finally slumped back on the hospital bed, eyes closed. Her chest heaved, not just from physical pain but from the accumulated stress of months, maybe years. Jonathan watched the monitors and listened to the beeping rhythms, a strange calm settling over him. He had money, influence, and resources, but none of that could fix the raw human suffering in front of him. Then, as he absent-mindedly sorted through the pile of papers Nia had brought with her, one envelope caught his attention. It had been partially opened and bore a familiar logo, Pierce Medical Foundation. Jonathan froze. He recognized the foundation immediately. It was his family's philanthropic organization, the one he had quietly helped fund for over a decade. He had personally signed off on grants to families in need, ensuring that medical expenses were covered for children whose parents couldn't pay. But he had never seen this girl before, at least not in person. Carefully he opened the envelope. Inside were old medical bills, notices of denied assistance, and a handwritten letter from Nia's mother, Monique. The handwriting was careful, full of hope and desperation all at once. And tucked among the bills was a faded note thanking the Pierce Foundation for a past donation, long ago, that had helped cover some of Monique's earlier medical expenses. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. This can't be a coincidence, he whispered to himself. Nia stirred, opening her eyes just enough to meet his gaze. Who are you? She asked weakly. And why do you have my envelope? Jonathan hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I'm Jonathan Pierce. My family's foundation helped your mother years ago. I think it's possible that, without realizing it, you've been surviving in part because of us." Nia blinked, trying to process the words. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked down at her lap, tears beginning to well. The idea that someone had cared for her family, quietly and without her knowledge, stirred a strange mixture of relief, anger, and disbelief. They did?" she asked finally, voice trembling. We never knew. We never even got a thank you letter. I thought we were just forgotten." Jonathan placed a hand gently over hers. "You weren't forgotten. Maybe you just needed someone to find you again." A silence fell over the room. The soft hum of medical machines and the distant chatter of nurses became a kind of private space, separate from the chaotic world outside. For the first time in months, Nia allowed herself to breathe without shame or fear. But just as Jonathan felt a rare sense of peace, the door to the room opened abruptly. A man in a sharply tailored suit stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Pierce," the man said, voice low but firm, "I need a word with you. Now." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "Excuse me, This can't wait," the man interrupted, glancing briefly at Nia before turning his attention back to Jonathan. "It's urgent, confidential, alone." Jonathan hesitated, looking down at Nia. Her wide, frightened eyes followed his every movement. He realized that whatever this was, it might change everything tonight. As he nodded to the man and stepped outside the room, he cast a quick glance back at Nia. She was still clutching the coat around her, her lips trembling, her eyes wide as if she sensed that life as she knew it was about to shift again, though she couldn't possibly know how. The man's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Mr. Pierce, there's something you need to see about her family. Something you weren't told." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. His instincts screamed that this was no ordinary situation. Something hidden, something dangerous and possibly heartbreaking, was waiting just beyond the hospital walls. Jonathan's eyes widened as the man handed him a folder. On the top of it, in bold letters, was a name that made his heart stop, and a secret that could change everything for Nia and her mother forever. Jonathan gripped the folder tightly, the glossy black leather of his briefcase cold against his palm. The hospital corridor was quiet at this hour, the muted hum of fluorescent lights above echoing slightly against the sterile walls. He glanced over at the man who had handed him the folder. "Go on," the man said quietly. "You need to see this before it's too late." Jonathan took a deep breath and flipped open the folder. Inside were medical records, financial documents, and a series of correspondence letters, all tied to Monique Johnson, Nia's mother. The first thing that caught his attention was a handwritten note from a doctor, dated nearly a decade ago. It detailed a series of misdiagnoses, mistreatments, and financial predicaments that had nearly cost Monique her life. Then his eyes widened. One particular letter wasn't addressed to Monique, but to someone else, a hospital administrator named Malcolm Rivers. It detailed a deliberate delay in coverage as well as attempts to redirect funds from charitable foundations, including the Pierce Medical Foundation, toward projects that would benefit the hospital's board personally. Jonathan's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about unpaid bills anymore. Someone had actively manipulated the system to profit while Monique suffered. I don't understand," Jonathan murmured. "Why now? Why is this coming to light tonight?" The man stepped closer. "Because she's close to finding out, and that would be bad for certain people. Malcolm Rivers has been careful, but mistakes happen. Your intervention tonight? It set things in motion." Jonathan's mind raced. He couldn't let Nia find out yet. She was fragile, exhausted, and completely unaware of the storm looming over her mother's life. But he knew he couldn't ignore the evidence. Whoever Malcolm Rivers was, he wasn't just a bureaucrat, he was dangerous. Meanwhile, Nia rested in her hospital bed, unaware that her life had already intersected with someone who had quietly helped her family years ago. She clutched the coat Jonathan had wrapped around her, the warmth offering a fleeting sense of security. Her thoughts drifted to her mother. She wished she could reach her, hold her hand, and tell her that maybe, just maybe, someone out there cared. Jonathan closed the folder and straightened, his mind made up. He would protect Nia and Monique no matter the cost. But first he needed information. He turned to the man. How much does he know? Malcolm? Enough to be dangerous, the man said. He controls parts of the hospital records. He knows how to manipulate audits, cover tracks, and intimidate anyone who gets in his way. If he suspects the Pierce Foundation is involved, he could move against your family or against the Johnsons. Jonathan clenched his jaw. He wasn't about to let that happen. He had wealth, influence, and resources, yes, but this wasn't about money. This was about righting a wrong that had festered in silence for far too long. All right, Jonathan said finally. I need you to get me everything he's done over the past 10 years, every transaction, every record, every hidden communication. And I need it tonight. The man nodded. It'll be done. But, Jonathan, his voice dropped to a whisper. This won't just be a legal battle. He won't go quietly. And he's ruthless. Jonathan didn't flinch. I know. Back in the hospital room, Nia's eyes fluttered open. She rubbed her forehead, her body aching from the ordeal of the evening. Her gaze fell on Jonathan's empty chair, and a pang of uncertainty gnawed at her. Where had he gone? Was he abandoning her like so many others had before? Her heart raced as she reached for the hospital phone to call her mother, only to remember the last call had ended in frustration. Her mother resting, barely able to speak, and the line filled with the mechanical click of overdue bills and financial pressures. She swallowed hard and whispered, I just want someone to help me, someone who cares. And in that moment, fate seemed to intervene again. The door to her room opened slightly and a nurse peeked in. Miss Johnson, there's someone here to see you, she said, stepping aside. Jonathan returned, but he wasn't alone. Behind him was a woman in her late 30s, professional, calm, with an air of authority. Nia, she said softly. My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm from a nonprofit that works closely with Mr. Pierce's foundation. We help families like yours, people who have been overlooked, forgotten, or mismanaged by the system. We've been following your case for months. Nia's eyes widened. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. I don't understand. Why now? Rachel smiled gently. Because someone finally stepped in. And now, things are changing. Jonathan handed Nia the folder. Her hands trembled as she opened it, eyes scanning the pages filled with medical history, denied claims, and letters of correspondence she had never understood. Her stomach twisted as realization hit. Her mother had not only been struggling against illness, but against a system actively working against her. And somehow, Jonathan had found her at exactly the right moment. Tears welled up in Nia's eyes, threatening to spill over. She looked at Jonathan, the man who had appeared from nowhere on that rainy street, the stranger who now felt like the only anchor in her chaotic life. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan shook his head. You don't need to. Just promise me you'll stay strong. We'll figure this out together. But just as a fragile sense of hope settled in the room, a notification pinged on Jonathan's phone. He glanced down and froze. The message was brief but chilling. You're meddling where you shouldn't. Stop now or everything she cares about will be gone. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He glanced at Nia, who was still absorbed in the folder, unaware of the threat looming over her. Jonathan knew in that instant that saving Nia and her mother would not be simple. Malcolm Rivers wasn't just a corrupt administrator. He was watching them now, waiting and ready to strike. The fight had just begun. Jonathan sat in the hospital cafeteria, laptop open in front of him, his expression tense as he sifted through financial statements and hospital records Rachel had brought. The fluorescent lights above flickered occasionally, casting the room in brief shadows that matched his mood. Every line of data told the same story: deliberate neglect, mismanaged funds, and cover-ups designed to keep people like Monique and Nia powerless. He rubbed his eyes. Wealth and power had allowed him to solve many problems before, but this was different. This was personal. He couldn't rely on lawyers or formal complaints alone. Malcolm Rivers had built a fortress of corruption around himself. He would need strategy, precision, and timing. Rachel, sitting across from him, tapped her fingers on the table. "Jonathan, we can expose him legally, but we need irrefutable evidence. And we need to protect Nia and her mother while doing it." Jonathan nodded. "I understand. I won't let them touch her or her mother. But we also need to act fast. Malcolm isn't patient, and the moment he suspects we're investigating, he could retaliate." Rachel leaned forward. "I've compiled a list of anomalies: funds diverted, payments denied, communications hidden in server backups. If we present these to the authorities and the media at the same time, he won't have a chance to cover his tracks." Jonathan's mind raced. He thought of Nia, lying in her hospital bed, fragile but full of resilience. He thought of Monique, fighting illness and debt, unaware that someone was finally stepping in to protect them. The stakes were high, but the cost of inaction was unthinkable. Before they could finalize the plan, Jonathan's phone buzzed again. A new message had appeared, this time with a photograph attached. His stomach twisted as he opened it. It was Nia. Or rather, it appeared to be her. She was sitting on a bus, looking pale and anxious, clutching a bag to her chest. The caption read, "We see you. Stop or she pays the price." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Malcolm wasn't just threatening him, he was watching Nia. And now he was making it clear that any attempt to interfere would put her in danger. Rachel's eyes widened. "He's escalating. He's testing us. We need to move before he can act." Jonathan made a decision. "We need to confront him, but not head-on. We'll gather everything, create a full dossier, and go public at the right moment. And we'll need a safe place for Nia and her mother in the meantime." Back in her hospital room, Nia was still processing the folder. Her mind swirled with a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and fear. She had never imagined that her mother's struggles were part of something bigger, something sinister. And yet, here was Jonathan Pierce, a stranger turned savior, promising to protect them. Her phone buzzed and she froze. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Stop asking questions. Leave things alone or it gets worse." Her hands shook as she showed Jonathan. He read the message carefully, his jaw tightening. "It's him," he said quietly. "Malcolm Rivers. He's trying to scare you." Nia's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand. Why would anyone want to hurt us?" Jonathan put a hand on hers. "Some people in power only care about themselves. But that ends now." He spent the next hour explaining the plan to Nia in simple terms, assuring her that she and her mother would be safe. He promised that every precaution would be taken, that no stone would be left unturned, and that Malcolm Rivers would face justice. Despite his reassurances, a part of Nia remained uneasy. The thought of a powerful man lurking in the shadows, watching her every move, made her stomach twist with fear. But she also felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, someone truly cared about her well-being. Jonathan and Rachel moved quickly. They coordinated with trusted journalists, prepared encrypted backups of evidence, and even arranged temporary housing for Nia and her mother in a discreet location. Every step was measured, every action deliberate. Malcolm Rivers had built a web of control, but Jonathan was determined to untangle it thread by thread. As night fell over Chicago, Jonathan returned to the hospital room to check on Nia. She was asleep, exhaustion finally overtaking her fear. He stood silently by the bed, looking down at her and making a silent vow. No matter the cost, he would ensure that she and her mother were safe. Just as he was about to leave, Rachel approached with a folder in her hand. "Jonathan, you need to see this." Inside were recent security camera screenshots from the hospital. One frame froze his blood in his veins. Malcolm Rivers standing in the corridor near Nia's room watching the door. He had been inside the hospital earlier than anyone realized, observing her movements. Jonathan felt a cold dread settle over him. Malcolm wasn't just an administrator. He was dangerous, calculating, and closer than they had anticipated. Jonathan glanced at Nia, peacefully asleep, and then back at the images. He knew that Malcolm Rivers was waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment might come sooner than anyone expected. The night air in Chicago was heavy with rain and tension. Jonathan stood outside the hospital, phone in hand, coordinating with Rachel and the journalists they trusted. Every step had to be precise. every move calculated. Malcolm Rivers was clever, ruthless, and now he had begun to take direct action. Jonathan's mind raced. He thought about Nia and her mother, Monique, and the fragile sense of hope he had promised to protect. He couldn't let them be harmed. Not now. Not ever. Inside the hospital, Nia stirred awake, sensing a presence near her. She looked around the dimly lit room, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The shadows of the night seemed to stretch along the walls, making every movement appear exaggerated, almost threatening. Her phone buzzed again. She hesitated, fear gripping her chest. Another unknown message. You can't hide forever. Someone will pay. Nia's hands trembled as she showed the message to Jonathan. His eyes darkened. He's escalating faster than I thought, he said, his voice steady but firm. We need to act immediately. He's testing us, trying to intimidate us. Rachel appeared behind him. We've confirmed it, she said quietly. Malcolm has access to certain hospital areas. He's monitoring Nia's movements closely. He knows we're intervening. Jonathan's mind raced. He had always been a man used to control, to influencing situations with wealth and strategy. But this was different. This wasn't just a financial maneuver or a tech deal. This was someone targeting the most vulnerable. And he couldn't allow it. Jonathan quickly explained the plan to Nia. They would move her and her mother immediately to a secure, undisclosed location. The journalists would receive the evidence they had collected, ready for public exposure, while Jonathan and Rachel monitored Malcolm's movements. Nia's heart pounded. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. What if he finds us anyway? Jonathan knelt beside her bed. You're stronger than you think, he said softly. And you won't be alone. We'll get through this together. Within an hour, Nia and Monique were carefully transported to a safe house Rachel had prepared. It was modest, nondescript, but secure. Cameras, alarms, and locks ensured that no one could enter without authorization. Nia sank onto the couch, exhausted, her body shaking from fear and relief. Jonathan and Rachel began reviewing the hospital footage again, trying to anticipate Malcolm's next move. And then, without warning, a new problem appeared. A call from one of the hospital security staff had come in, urgent and panicked. Mr. Pierce, you need to come to the hospital immediately, the voice said. There's been an incident in Nia's room. Jonathan felt a sudden cold shock run down his spine. What kind of incident? He demanded. The voice hesitated. We don't know yet. There was some sort of breach. The room was empty when we checked. Her bed, her belongings, they were disturbed. Jonathan's hand tightened around the phone. His mind raced. Malcolm had anticipated their move. He had known they would try to relocate Nia and Monique. He was one step ahead. Rachel's face went pale. We need to get back now, she said, urgency in her voice. Whatever he's planning, it's moving fast. Jonathan didn't wait for confirmation. He grabbed his coat and keys and they rushed out into the night. Rain had intensified, soaking everything in a slick, reflective sheen. The city lights blurred as they drove, but Jonathan's focus was sharp. Every red light, every honking car seemed insignificant compared to the threat looming over Nia. At the safe house, Nia sat rigid, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Monique had just drifted into a troubled sleep, exhausted from the day's chaos. Nia tried to convince herself they were safe, but the messages from Malcolm continued to gnaw at her mind. Suddenly, there was a faint sound at the window, a shadow flickered against the blinds. Nia froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She crept to the window, heart pounding. Outside, barely visible in the rain, was a figure watching the house. A tall man in a dark coat, umbrella raised slightly, standing still as if waiting for a signal. Nia's stomach turned. He's here, she whispered, voice barely audible. Just then her phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. You can't hide. We're closer than you think. Nia's hands trembled as she dropped the phone. Fear surged through her. The safe house, which had felt like a fortress, suddenly seemed fragile, vulnerable. Jonathan and Rachel arrived moments later, their car tires splashing water onto the street. Jonathan jumped out, scanning the perimeter. His eyes met Nia's wide, terrified gaze. He clenched his jaw, fury and determination mingling in his expression. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "We'll handle this. No one touches you, not tonight. Not ever." Rachel began double-checking the locks and security cameras, while Jonathan pulled Nia aside. "Listen carefully," he said. "He's testing us, trying to intimidate us. But we're going to stay ahead. You need to trust me. We will not let him win." Nia nodded shakily, clinging to the only thread of hope she had left. As Jonathan spoke, a faint sound from the back of the house caught his attention. A soft click, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his blood run cold. Someone was inside. And just like that, the first real confrontation with Malcolm Rivers had begun. The safe house was supposed to be secure. Thick locks, reinforced doors, and a state-of-the-art alarm system. Everything Jonathan had insisted on should have been enough to keep Nia and Monique safe. Yet, as Jonathan's eyes scanned the dimly lit room, the faint sound of a door click sent a shiver down his spine. He motioned for Nia and Rachel to stay back, his senses on high alert. Every muscle in his body tensed. Someone had bypassed their security. Someone was inside. Jonathan moved silently toward the hallway, careful to remain hidden in the shadows. His pulse quickened as he traced the faint footsteps echoing from the other side of the house. Whoever it was, they knew exactly how to avoid detection. Nia huddled on the couch, clutching the blanket to her chest. "Jonathan, what's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan didn't answer. He had to be precise. He couldn't let fear take control, not now, not when so much was at stake. The intruder moved with calculated stealth, a shadow slipping past the living room and toward the back staircase. Jonathan's eyes narrowed as he recognized the figure. Malcolm Rivers. The man had followed them. He had tracked Nia's movements from the hospital to the safe house, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jonathan stepped forward, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the counter. He held it like a weapon ready to confront Malcolm. "Looking for someone?" Jonathan's voice was calm but carried an undeniable edge. Malcolm froze for a moment, his dark eyes glinting with a mix of anger and amusement. "Pierce," he said, his tone almost conversational. "I have to hand it to you. You're clever. But clever isn't enough." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You threatened her. You threatened her mother. And now you're inside my house. That's far beyond clever. That's criminal." Malcolm smirked. "Criminal? Maybe. But effective. And you're about to find out just how effective I can be." Before Jonathan could respond, Malcolm lunged toward the back staircase, attempting to escape or gain leverage. Jonathan swung the flashlight, striking the man's hand. The impact made a sharp crack and Malcolm staggered back, cursing under his breath. Nia screamed, startled by the sudden noise. Monique stirred from her room, alarmed by the commotion. Jonathan quickly ushered both women into a secure bedroom, locking the door behind them. "Stay here," he whispered. "No matter what you hear, do not come out." Rachel moved to reinforce the barricade at the living room entrance. "Jonathan, he's stronger than we expected," she said, her voice tight with concern. "He won't give up easily." Jonathan nodded, fists clenched. He had anticipated confrontation, but Malcolm's boldness had exceeded every expectation. Every instinct told him this man would stop at nothing to regain control over Nia, over Monique, over the evidence that could ruin him. The sound of a scuffle echoed through the house. Jonathan advanced cautiously, each step deliberate. His eyes caught a glint of metal, a small handheld device Malcolm was attempting to use to bypass the security system. Jonathan lunged, grabbing the device and smashing it to the floor. Sparks flew, and a small alarm beeped briefly before going silent. Malcolm froze, staring at Jonathan with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. You're making this personal," he spat. Jonathan's gaze was unwavering. "You made it personal when you threatened an innocent girl and her mother. This ends tonight." Malcolm's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Oh, it's just beginning." At that moment, the power in the house flickered, plunging the rooms into near darkness. Rain pounded against the windows, amplifying the tension. Jonathan's flashlight cut through the shadows, illuminating Malcolm's face, a mask of rage and determination. The two men circled each other, tension thick in the air, like predators sizing up their prey. Outside, the storm intensified, the wind lashing against the walls of the house as if nature itself recognized the battle unfolding inside. Meanwhile, in the locked bedroom, Nia pressed herself against the door. Her heart raced uncontrollably. She could hear every word, every movement, every clash of metal against metal. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, whispering words of comfort she didn't feel herself. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "You're safe," Monique whispered back, though her own voice quivered. "Jonathan, he's protecting us." Nia nodded, trying to believe it, though the sounds from the other side of the door threatened to shatter that fragile hope. After several tense minutes, the struggle in the living room came to an abrupt halt. Jonathan emerged from the shadows, breathing heavily but victorious. Malcolm lay sprawled on the floor, groaning, the devices he had brought now useless. Jonathan stood over him, chest heaving, flashlight still in hand. "This is your last warning," Jonathan said, voice low but unwavering. "Leave. Walk away. Never come near them again." Malcolm glared at him, then slowly pushed himself up. "This isn't over," he spat before limping toward the door. He disappeared into the night, leaving a trail of wet footprints behind him. Jonathan exhaled deeply, his body finally relaxing, but only slightly. He knew this was just the beginning. Malcolm was ruthless, and tonight had only confirmed just how far he would go to protect his secrets. Nia and Monique stepped out of the bedroom, trembling but safe. Nia's eyes met Jonathan's, gratitude and fear intertwined. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonathan smiled faintly, exhaustion lining his features. "We're not done yet. But tonight you're safe." As the storm outside began to fade, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a new alert, a GPS ping showing that someone had tracked Nia's phone even after Malcolm fled. Jonathan's blood ran cold. Malcolm Rivers wasn't finished, and the real battle was only just beginning. The storm had passed, leaving Chicago streets glistening under the early morning light. But the calm was deceptive. Inside the safe house, Jonathan sat at a small desk, eyes glued to multiple monitors, tracing every signal, every movement that might reveal Malcolm Rivers' next move. Nia sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, still trembling from the night's confrontation. Her mother, Monique, dozed fitfully in the armchair beside her, finally able to rest without the immediate threat looming over them. But even in sleep, the weight of fear lingered in their hearts. Jonathan turned his attention to the laptop. The GPS ping from Nia's phone had shown movement overnight, despite Malcolm having fled the house. His stomach tightened as he analyzed the data. Malcolm had anticipated their actions, possibly using the phone to track Nia's exact location. He clenched his fists. Malcolm wasn't just cunning, he was dangerous, precise, and patient. Jonathan knew that to protect Nia, they would need to outthink him, outmaneuver him at every turn. Rachel, monitoring the situation from another screen, spoke up. "Jonathan, look at this. There's activity near the hospital again. Someone's accessing the security cameras remotely. It's Malcolm." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "He's escalating. He's learning our patterns, predicting our moves. We need to change tactics immediately. Safe house rotations, encrypted communication. Every precaution we can take." Nia, trying to process everything, looked up at Jonathan. "Why is he doing this to us? Why would he care so much about everything?" Jonathan's gaze softened, though his mind was still racing. Some people in power only care about themselves. Malcolm sees threats where there aren't any, and when he does, he'll do whatever it takes to maintain control. Nia shivered. "I feel like he's always going to be there. Watching. Waiting." Jonathan nodded. "That's why we stay ahead. Every move we make, every step you take, we control it. You're not alone anymore. I promise you that." To prevent further tracking, Jonathan arranged for Nia and Monique to be moved to a second safe location, a small, secluded apartment in the Lincoln Park area, away from familiar streets and potential cameras. The transition had to be quick, quiet, and unnoticed. As the women were escorted by Rachel and a trusted security team, Jonathan stayed behind to pack essential documents. Medical records, evidence of Malcolm's corruption, and backups of everything they had collected so far. Every piece of data was crucial. One misstep could undo months of planning and put Nia and her mother at risk again. Once the move was complete, Jonathan reviewed the new location, checking all entry points, cameras, and alarms. The apartment was modest, but strategically placed for privacy and security. He allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but it was fleeting. Later that evening, Nia tried to settle into her new surroundings. The apartment felt strange and unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. For the first time in days, she could breathe without fear of immediate confrontation. But the shadow of Malcolm Rivers still loomed. Every noise outside the window, every passing car, sent her heart racing. Jonathan had promised safety, but how could she trust someone who had already seen her stalked, threatened, and nearly harmed? Rachel sat with her, explaining how they would monitor every potential threat and maintain constant communication. "You're protected, Nia. But you have to trust us. You can't let fear control you." Nia nodded, though anxiety lingered. She felt small, fragile, and exposed. Yet part of her was beginning to understand that Jonathan had intervened in her life for a reason. Jonathan returned late at night from coordinating with journalists and law enforcement allies. He entered the apartment quietly, careful not to disturb Nia and Monique. As he approached the living room, his phone buzzed with a notification. A new image had appeared, a shadowed figure standing near the back of the Lincoln Park building. Though the figure was indistinct, the posture and height were unmistakable. Malcolm was closer than they had anticipated. Jonathan's blood ran cold. He had underestimated Malcolm's persistence and reach. The man was relentless, patient, and had resources he hadn't anticipated. He quickly activated the apartment's security protocols, locking doors and setting up motion sensors. Every possible measure was in place, but he knew it wasn't enough. Malcolm wasn't just targeting them physically, he was trying to terrorize them psychologically, to break their resolve and force them to make mistakes. Nia stirred from her uneasy sleep. "Jonathan, did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jonathan crouched beside her. "Yes, he's close, but you're safe. For now." Her eyes filled with tears. I can't live like this. Always afraid." Jonathan held her hand gently. "You don't have to. That's why I'm here. We'll fight this together. You're not alone." The words were meant to comfort her, but inside, Jonathan felt the weight of the looming threat. Malcolm Rivers had proven he could strike anywhere, anytime. Every plan had to account for unpredictability, and every decision carried immense risk. As Jonathan spoke, a faint, deliberate tapping sound came from the window, a slow, measured pattern that made his stomach knot. Someone was signaling. Someone was outside. Malcolm Rivers had found them again. And this time, he wasn't alone. The tapping at the window didn't stop. Jonathan's heart pounded as he crouched beside Nia, listening intently. Each tap was deliberate, slow, and rhythmic. A message, a warning, a challenge. His instincts screamed that Malcolm Rivers wasn't acting alone this time. He motioned for Nia and Monique to stay down as he crept toward the window. Rain from earlier still clung to the edges, creating distorted reflections on the glass. Jonathan's eyes scanned the shadows outside. A figure moved briefly, disappearing behind the corner of the building. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Malcolm was close, but someone else was here, someone he hadn't anticipated. Rachel, monitoring the external cameras, leaned over his shoulder. "Jonathan, it's a team. He brought help. Probably someone to track or intimidate Nia directly." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Damn it. He's escalating faster than we predicted. We need to be ready for anything." Meanwhile, Nia clung to the blanket, her body trembling. She didn't know who the intruders were, only that danger had followed them from Chicago's hospital corridors to their supposed safe haven in Lincoln Park. "I can't believe this is happening again," she whispered. "Every time I think we're safe, it's like he's always one step ahead." Jonathan put a reassuring hand on hers. "I know it feels impossible, but you're stronger than you realize, and we'll make it through this. Together." She nodded, though fear still churned in her chest. She wanted to believe him desperately, but the reality of Malcolm's persistence weighed on her like a heavy blanket she couldn't shake off. Jonathan and Rachel worked quickly. They contacted law enforcement, but the threat was delicate. Any wrong move could put Nia and Monique directly in harm's way. Jonathan decided they needed a controlled bait, something to draw Malcolm into a situation where he could be exposed and captured without endangering the women. Jonathan outlined the plan to Rachel in hushed tones. "We make it look like we're transporting Nia to a hospital for a checkup tomorrow morning. Malcolm will take the bait. He'll think he has a chance to strike, but we'll have law enforcement waiting. Surveillance cameras, backup teams, everything." Rachel nodded. "It's risky. He's unpredictable." "I know," Jonathan admitted, "but it's the only way to end this before he escalates further." That night, Jonathan set up additional cameras around the safe house, monitoring every possible point of entry. He reviewed past surveillance footage, looking for any pattern, any weakness in Malcolm's methods. At precisely 2:30 a.m., the first break occurred. A faint click echoed from the back door, a masterfully picked lock, subtle enough to bypass most alarms. Jonathan tensed, listening as shadowy movements crept through the corridors. Malcolm had arrived early, testing the defenses and confirming his access points. Jonathan whispered into his earpiece to Rachel and the security team, "He's inside. Everyone stay alert. Don't engage until we have confirmation." Nia woke briefly to the noise, her eyes wide with panic. "Jonathan?" she whispered, voice shaking. He crouched beside her, keeping his voice low. "It's okay. Stay calm. Just stay down. You're safe." Her gaze shifted toward the dark hallway outside the bedroom door. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the distant sound of a footstep, the whisper of fabric against walls, the subtle creak of the floor. Jonathan's muscles tensed, ready to confront whoever came near. The intruder moved carefully, almost like a shadow sliding across the room. But then a misstep, a floorboard creaking underfoot, gave Jonathan the advantage. He lunged silently, tackling the figure to the ground. A scuffle ensued. Jonathan's training and strength gave him the upper hand, but it was clear the intruder was skilled, experienced in combat, and unafraid of confrontation. Finally, Jonathan pinned the man, pressing a hand over his mouth to silence any noise. Slowly he lifted the hood. His blood ran cold. It wasn't Malcolm. It was a tall, imposing man in his late 30s, face partially obscured but unmistakable in its cold, calculating expression. Jonathan recognized him immediately from the intelligence reports Rachel had pulled. The man was a private operative, someone Malcolm Rivers had hired years ago to do the dirty work he couldn't risk himself. Jonathan's grip tightened. "Who sent you?" he demanded, voice low but sharp. The operative smirked, eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "You think you've outsmarted Malcolm? You're playing with fire, Pierce. And you have no idea what's coming next." Jonathan's stomach sank. Malcolm wasn't acting alone anymore. He had resources, manpower, and now direct agents ready to confront anyone who threatened his secrets. The fight was far from over. As Jonathan restrained the operative, another movement caught his eye, through the rain-streaked window. A black SUV had pulled up across the street, lights off, engine running. Malcolm Rivers was inside, watching. Jonathan realized with chilling certainty that the next strike would be personal, targeted, and unstoppable unless he acted first. The Lincoln Park apartment had gone silent after the confrontation with the operative. Nia and Monique sat huddled together on the couch, still shaking from fear, while Jonathan kept the restrained man pinned, his mind racing. He knew this was only the beginning. Malcolm Rivers had more plans and they were escalating rapidly. Jonathan glanced at Rachel, who had stepped back, her face pale but determined. "We need to move him now," she said. "If Malcolm suspects we've caught one of his men, he'll retaliate immediately." Jonathan nodded. He pulled the operative to his feet and handed him off to the security team, who quickly placed him in a secure holding area. Every step, every movement was deliberate. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the streets glistening under the pale light of the street lamps. But the tension in the air was electric. Malcolm wasn't finished. Nia clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her mind racing. "Jonathan, he's going to come back, isn't he?" she whispered, voice trembling. Jonathan crouched beside her, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Malcolm is dangerous, yes. But you're not alone. We'll stay ahead. We'll protect you." Her eyes filled with tears. I want to feel safe. Just once." Jonathan's gaze softened. "You will. We'll make sure of it. But sometimes to survive, you have to face the storm before it passes." Nia nodded weakly, trying to find comfort in his words, though fear still churned inside her. Meanwhile, outside the apartment, a black SUV lurked in the shadows. Malcolm Rivers sat behind the wheel, rain droplets sliding across the windshield. His face was obscured by the darkness, but the cold, calculating look in his eyes was unmistakable. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, thinking several moves ahead. "Pierce thinks he can control this," he muttered under his breath. "But he underestimates me. He always does." Inside the SUV, a team of operatives waited, ready to execute his next plan. Malcolm had learned from the failed attempt inside the apartment, and he wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. This time he intended to strike where it would hurt most, psychologically and strategically. Jonathan reviewed the footage again, looking for any signs of movement outside. He noticed the black SUV parked across the street, engine running, shadows obscuring the occupants. His stomach tightened. Malcolm was watching, waiting for the right moment. "We need to evacuate," Jonathan said to Rachel. "He's not just testing us anymore. He's preparing for something bigger." Rachel nodded, already coordinating with the security team. "We have alternate routes, safe houses prepped. Nia and Monique will be moved immediately." Jonathan turned to Nia and Monique. "We're moving you again," he explained calmly. "This place is compromised. You need to stay ahead of him, and we need to make sure you're safe." Nia's eyes widened. "Again? But where? Oh, I can't keep running like this." "You can," Jonathan said firmly, "because you're not alone. I'll be with you every step of the way. We'll make sure Malcolm doesn't get a chance to strike." The move was executed under cover of darkness. Nia and Monique were escorted out through a side exit, guided by Jonathan and Rachel, while security personnel kept watch. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds being the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement and the occasional drip of rain from the rooftops. Malcolm's team followed at a distance, careful not to be seen. He remained in the SUV, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, calculating every movement. His plan was precise: force Jonathan into a corner, separate him from Nia, and regain control. But Jonathan had anticipated surveillance. He took a series of winding routes, utilizing backstreets and alleyways to keep Malcolm off balance. Each turn, each diversion, was carefully calculated to protect the women while frustrating their pursuer. Finally, they reached the new safe house, a small, unassuming townhouse on the outskirts of the city. It was prepared with additional security measures, including reinforced doors, surveillance cameras, and encrypted communication lines. Jonathan helped Nia and Monique inside, ensuring their immediate safety. For a moment, there was a fragile sense of relief. Nia sank into the couch, finally allowing herself to breathe, if only slightly. Monique rested her head against Nia's shoulder, exhausted but grateful. Jonathan, however, remained on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that Malcolm's plan was already in motion. The operative caught inside the first safe house was only the beginning. Malcolm Rivers was clever, patient, and relentless. And the moment they let their guard down, he would strike again. As Jonathan checked the perimeter one last time, his phone buzzed. A new message appeared, this one from an unknown number. "You can hide, Pierce, but she's already mine." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Nia's life was in direct danger, and Malcolm Rivers had just raised the stakes. The small townhouse on the outskirts of Chicago seemed quiet, almost deceptively peaceful. Nia and Monique tried to relax, but the tension in the air was palpable. Jonathan and Rachel had reinforced every door and window, yet he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that Malcolm Rivers was already plotting his next move. Jonathan paced the living room, phone in hand, reviewing live feeds from every camera surrounding the safe house. Every shadow, every flicker of movement was scrutinized. The operative from the first attack had been taken into custody, but Jonathan knew that Malcolm's reach went far beyond one man. "He's patient," Jonathan muttered to Rachel. "He's waiting for us to make a mistake. And when we do, he'll strike." Rachel nodded, her expression grim. "We've seen how far he's willing to go. I'm not sure any law enforcement can match his level of planning." Jonathan's eyes flicked to Nia, who sat huddled on the couch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked small and fragile, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes, a quiet strength that had kept her alive this far. He wished he could shield her from the fear, from the constant anxiety that Malcolm had instilled, but he knew that tonight, more than ever, they had to be ready. Hours passed. The night deepened, and the rain had returned in light, persistent sheets, tapping against the windows. Jonathan monitored every angle, every possible approach. Then a sudden beep from the perimeter cameras made him freeze. "Rachel, did you see that?" he whispered. Rachel leaned over his shoulder. "Yes, but it can't be. The cameras show no one approaching." Jonathan's pulse quickened. Something was off. The feed showed shadows, movement, but no one visible. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but he had learned to trust his instincts. Something or someone was inside their perimeter. "Impossible," Rachel murmured, frowning. "We've secured all entrances." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Nothing is impossible with Malcolm. Meanwhile, Nia's unease had grown. She had been restless for hours, sensing a presence she couldn't explain. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, set her nerves on edge. She hugged her knees to her chest and whispered to her mother, "I feel like he's here, inside, watching us." Monique tried to reassure her, but even she couldn't deny the lingering fear. "We're safe. Jonathan and Rachel won't let anything happen," she said, though her own voice trembled. Nia's gaze drifted toward the window, half expecting to see Malcolm lurking in the shadows. But the street outside was empty, the rain glistening under the dim streetlights. She closed her eyes, willing herself to believe in safety. Jonathan's hand hovered over his phone. He had coordinated with law enforcement, but the threat was subtle, intelligent, and adaptive. He knew Malcolm wouldn't make the mistake of direct confrontation tonight. No, this was psychological, designed to unsettle them, to test their resolve. Then his screen blinked. A series of encrypted messages appeared, images from inside the townhouse itself. Jonathan's blood ran cold. Malcolm had somehow gained access to one of the hidden cameras they thought were secure. "Rachel, he's inside," Jonathan whispered, his voice tight with controlled panic. Rachel's eyes widened. How is that possible? "We checked all systems." Jonathan shook his head. "He's clever. And patient. And he's been planning this for months." The lights flickered once, then twice. Nia gasped, gripping the blanket tightly. Monique froze, fear rooting her to the chair. Jonathan's heart pounded as he moved swiftly to the main control panel, checking all backup systems. Outside, the storm raged. Rain lashed against the windows, wind rattled the shutters. But inside, the true storm was invisible, insidious. Malcolm Rivers wasn't just outside, they couldn't see him, but he was close enough to manipulate, to threaten, to terrorize. Jonathan whispered into his headset. "Everyone stay alert. No one leaves their positions. He's testing us, looking for a way in." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the basement. Jonathan's body tensed instantly. That wasn't the wind. That wasn't a falling object. Someone, or something, had forced entry. "Nia, Monique, stay in the bedroom," he yelled, sprinting toward the source of the noise. Rachel followed closely, flashlight in hand, eyes scanning every corner. The hallway was dark, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. The air felt thick, almost charged, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Jonathan descended into the basement slowly, flashlight sweeping over every surface. He could hear faint shuffling, the scrape of shoes on concrete. Then movement, a shadow darted across the wall. He raised his voice. "Show yourself." Silence. Then a figure emerged from behind a stack of boxes. Tall, imposing, And yet, when Jonathan recognized the face, his stomach dropped. It wasn't Malcolm. It was someone else, someone unexpected, someone connected to Nia's past. A figure from her life she hadn't seen in years, a person who should have been safe. "Nia?" the figure said, voice hesitant, almost afraid. Jonathan froze. Confusion and suspicion flooded his mind. Who was this? How had they gained access? And what were their intentions? Before he could react, the stranger whispered urgently, "Jonathan, he knows everything. Nia, you're in more danger than you realize. And this time, it's personal." The stranger in the basement froze as Jonathan's flashlight illuminated his face. Jonathan's mind raced. He had been prepared for Malcolm Rivers, his operatives, threats, and traps. But this was unexpected. The man's eyes flicked nervously to the stacks of boxes, then back at Jonathan. Who are you?" Jonathan demanded, voice low but sharp. The stranger swallowed hard. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I used to work with Malcolm." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He had anticipated deception, but this was more complicated than he imagined. "Used to? Explain." "Now." Ethan took a shaky breath. "I left his organization years ago. I thought I was done with him, until tonight. Malcolm's not just after Nia because of her mother's records. He's after her because of something she represents, something he's been hiding for a long time." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "What does she represent?" Ethan hesitated, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "Your intervention tonight exposed a chain of events Malcolm thought was buried. He's been covering up a series of fraudulent medical trials, illegal funding schemes, and Nia's mother, Monique, unknowingly held the key to evidence he spent years hiding. Malcolm knows she survived and that she's in the system, which makes Nia a threat to him." Nia's eyes widened from the doorway of the basement stairs. "What do you mean? How is my mother? How am I involved?" Jonathan moved closer to her, protective. "It's complicated, Nia. But the important part is you're alive and we're going to make sure you stay that way." Ethan swallowed hard again, his hands shaking. "Malcolm won't stop until he either eliminates the evidence or eliminates anyone standing in his way. That includes you, Nia." The weight of the revelation pressed down on them. Nia's heart raced as the pieces fell into place. The constant stalking, the messages, the intrusions. Her life had intersected with someone who wielded power like a weapon, and unknowingly she had become the center of his focus. Jonathan took a deep breath. "We need a full account. Tell me everything you know, Ethan. No detail is too small." Ethan nodded. "Malcolm's network is bigger than you realize. Hospitals, charities, private contractors. Anyone who might have access to information about Monique's medical history, financial aid, or her interactions with the Pierce Foundation. He's watching. He has eyes everywhere. He's also extremely patient. He planned for years to cover his tracks, and now he's trying to silence the one person who can expose him, Nia." Jonathan's mind raced. Every contingency, every precaution would need to be recalculated. Malcolm's obsession with control made him unpredictable, and Nia's safety hung in the balance. Rachel spoke up from the stairwell. "We can't wait. He's already testing our limits, probing for weaknesses. If we don't act, he'll strike again, and this time he might succeed." Jonathan nodded. "Ethan, you're going to help us. We need to map out his network, his operatives, his resources. Every contact, every ally, every potential weakness. And we move fast. There's no time to hesitate." Hours passed as Ethan detailed everything he knew about Malcolm's operations. Jonathan and Rachel took meticulous notes, plotting a strategy that would protect Nia and Monique while simultaneously dismantling Malcolm's network. It was intricate, dangerous, and required absolute precision. Nia, though exhausted, listened quietly, realizing that her life had been entangled in something far bigger than she ever imagined. Her fear was tempered by a glimmer of hope. Jonathan and Rachel weren't just protecting her, they were preparing to fight back. Monique stirred from her sleep, sensing the tension in the room. "What's happening?" she asked groggily. Jonathan turned to her gently. "We've uncovered the truth, Monique, and we're going to make sure you and Nia are safe. But it won't be easy. Malcolm Rivers is dangerous and he's not going to give up without a fight. Monique's eyes widened, but she nodded, trusting Jonathan despite the chaos surrounding them. Suddenly, Jonathan's phone buzzed. A new message appeared on the screen. "You think you know everything, Pierce, but you don't. Stop, or the next move is irreversible." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Malcolm had anticipated Ethan's intervention. He wasn't just observing, they were being manipulated. Every step they took, Malcolm had already calculated 2 moves ahead. Jonathan looked at Ethan, who swallowed nervously. "He knows we're here," Ethan admitted, "and he's preparing his next strike." Jonathan's fists clenched. "Then we make the next strike first. We take the fight to him before he can reach us, or anyone else. No hesitation. No mistakes." As Jonathan gathered his team to plan the counterattack, a faint noise from the street outside caught his attention. Through the rain-streaked windows, a shadow lingered, a figure unmistakably familiar, standing motionless, watching. Malcolm Rivers had returned, and this time he was ready to confront them all directly. The Lincoln Park townhouse was silent, but the calm was deceptive. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should, every creak of the floorboards sounded louder in the stillness. Nia sat with Monique in the corner of the living room, holding her mother's hand tightly. Fear churned in her stomach, but a small flicker of hope remained. Jonathan and Rachel were there, and they had a plan. Jonathan paced the floor, phone in hand, coordinating with law enforcement and Ethan Caldwell. Every call, every message was a calculation. Every second counted. Malcolm Rivers had returned, and he was no longer playing the cat-and-mouse game from the shadows. This time he was prepared for confrontation. "He's moving fast," Rachel whispered, her eyes scanning the monitors. "We're seeing multiple vehicles surrounding the perimeter. This isn't just him, it's a full strike team." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "He wants to intimidate us and he's testing our defenses. But we need to be proactive. Ethan, outline everything you know about his operatives and their tactics." Ethan stepped forward, anxiety visible in his posture. "Malcolm uses fear as a weapon. He sends messages, creates diversions, manipulates people close to the target. Tonight, he'll attempt to overwhelm us. Multiple entry points, psychological tactics. He's ruthless but predictable if we anticipate his moves." Jonathan nodded. "Then we anticipate. Every door, every window, every shadow. We stay ahead and we protect Nia and Monique no matter what." Outside, Malcolm Rivers' SUV headlights glinted in the rain-slicked streets. He stepped out, umbrella in hand, dark coat clinging to his frame. His team fanned out, some watching the doors, others remaining hidden in vehicles across the street. He smiled coldly, confident. He had calculated every possibility, but he hadn't accounted for Jonathan Pierce's resources, nor his unyielding determination. Back inside, Jonathan activated the final layer of security measures: reinforced locks, motion sensors, and encrypted alerts to law enforcement. The townhouse felt fortified, but he knew that Malcolm's ingenuity could bypass most defenses if given the right opportunity. He crouched beside Nia. "Listen carefully," he said. "You stay here. No matter what happens, you do not leave this room. Understand?" Nia nodded, trembling, but her eyes showed a growing determination. "I understand." Monique clutched her daughter's hand, trying to remain calm. "Jonathan, please," she whispered. "Keep us safe." Jonathan's eyes met hers, unwavering. "I promise. I will not let anything happen to you too." The first attempt came just before midnight. A faint scraping noise echoed near the back door, a subtle but deliberate test. Jonathan grabbed a flashlight and silently moved toward the sound, motion sensors confirming movement near the rear of the house. Malcolm's operatives were probing, searching for weaknesses, attempting to intimidate without committing to a direct assault. Jonathan's hand hovered over his phone, ready to alert law enforcement, but he wanted the first strike to be theirs, controlled and decisive. Rachel whispered through the earpiece, "Jonathan, they're synchronized. Multiple entries. This is the setup we feared. He's trying to overwhelm our response." Jonathan clenched his jaw. "Then we stay focused. Control the situation. One step at a time." Hours dragged on. Rain battered the windows, masking the movements of Malcolm's team outside. Shadows flickered under streetlights, each one triggering anxiety in Nia and Monique. Jonathan and Rachel maintained communication with law enforcement, while Ethan mapped potential entry points, predicting every move Malcolm might attempt. Nia whispered from the bedroom, "I can hear them, outside." Jonathan crouched beside her, voice calm but firm. "It's okay. You're safe in here. They can't get to you. Just stay with your mom and trust us." Her small hand gripped his tightly. "I trust you," she whispered, voice trembling. Jonathan's chest tightened. Protecting Nia wasn't just about security systems or strategy, it was about courage, vigilance, and the will to act decisively. And Malcolm Rivers had no shortage of cunning. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted at the front entrance. The reinforced door shuddered under the force of the first real assault. Jonathan moved with lightning speed, flashlight sweeping the hallway. Ethan and Rachel flanked him, prepared to intercept any intruder. Jonathan whispered urgently, "They're testing our limits. Hold your positions. Do not engage until I give the signal." The crash repeated, louder this time, accompanied by shouts and commands in harsh tones. Malcolm Rivers had initiated the siege. He was no longer waiting in the shadows. He was demanding attention, asserting control, and trying to force Jonathan into a reaction. Jonathan's phone buzzed again. A live camera feed from outside the bedroom window showed a shadow moving closer, faster, deliberate. It wasn't just Malcolm. His team had found a secondary approach. And in that moment, Jonathan realized with chilling certainty that tonight, the battle would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage he possessed. The night air outside the Lincoln Park townhouse was thick with tension. Rain had stopped, but the streets glistened under dim streetlights, reflecting the shadowy figures moving purposefully in the darkness. Inside, Jonathan, Rachel, and Ethan were fully alert, their eyes scanning monitors, flashlights in hand, prepared for every contingency. Malcolm Rivers wasn't content with testing their defenses anymore. He had escalated. His operatives had begun to coordinate a multi-pronged assault, probing every possible entry point and creating diversions to weaken the household's defenses. Every second felt like a lifetime. Jonathan crouched near the living room entrance, whispering into his headset. "Positions? No. Nia and Monique stay in the bedroom. Every movement outside is calculated. They're trying to lure us into a mistake. Do not engage unless necessary." Rachel nodded, glancing at the monitors. "They're moving in synchronized patterns. It's precise but predictable if we anticipate it correctly." Ethan, standing near the stairs, added, "Malcolm's strategy is psychological as much as physical. He wants you to panic, Jonathan. Every sound, every shadow is designed to make you second-guess. Stay sharp. Trust your instincts." Nia clutched the blanket tightly, her small body trembling. Monique whispered reassurances, but fear was evident in both their eyes. Nia's mind raced, replaying the moments from the hospital, the safe houses, the intrusions. The realization that Malcolm Rivers had been targeting her and her mother for reasons beyond her comprehension was terrifying. Jonathan crouched beside her bedroom door, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here. Stay calm. Trust us. No one will get to you." Her eyes met his, full of a mix of fear and trust. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "I know," Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm. "But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. And tonight we're going to act." Outside, the first real wave of the siege began. A loud crash came from the side entrance, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Jonathan moved swiftly, flashlight cutting through the shadows, revealing two operatives attempting to force their way in. He reacted instantly, intercepting them before they could reach the main living area. Rachel flanked him, holding a stun device, while Ethan secured another hallway, guiding intruders away from the rooms where Nia and Monique were hidden. Every second counted, and every move was precise. Jonathan's breath came in short bursts, muscles taut as he anticipated each attack. The intruders were skilled, but their timing was slightly off, a flaw Jonathan exploited. One by one, he neutralized their advances, buying crucial moments to protect the women. The psychological warfare escalated as well. Malcolm's team shouted threats, taunts meant to intimidate. "Pierce, you can't protect her forever. She's ours." Nia clutched her mother, heart pounding. Monique's hands trembled as she whispered, "It's okay, it's okay. Jonathan's here." Jonathan's mind raced. He had to end the siege before it spiraled into something uncontrollable. Every strike he made, every maneuver he executed, was designed to buy time, to safeguard the women, and to draw Malcolm into a position where law enforcement could intervene. Hours felt like minutes, and Jonathan's endurance was being tested. But he refused to falter. Each intruder neutralized, each diversion blocked, brought them closer to surviving the night. Then came the unexpected. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, a soft click of a lock, followed by a whisper. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. He knew the sound instantly. It wasn't one of Malcolm's known operatives. A shadow appeared in the hallway, moving with a grace that suggested trained skill. Jonathan's instincts screamed at him. This was someone else, someone far more dangerous and unpredictable. He raised his flashlight, illuminating the figure. It was a woman, tall, athletic, and cold-eyed. Her presence carried authority, and Jonathan recognized immediately that this wasn't just an operative sent by Malcolm. It was someone personal, someone who had a connection to Malcolm's world that was deeply rooted and dangerous. Ethan's voice came through the headset, tense. "Jonathan, that's Vivian Cross. She's one of Malcolm's top strategists, loyal, ruthless, and unpredictable. She's not here to negotiate. She's here to destroy any opposition." Jonathan's stomach tightened. He realized the siege had entered a new phase, one that was personal, strategic, and deadly. Malcolm had brought his top enforcer into the fold, and tonight, nothing would be left to chance. Jonathan tightened his grip on his flashlight and whispered to Rachel and Ethan, "She's the real threat now. Everything we've prepared, it starts here." From the shadows, Vivian Cross stepped forward, voice low and chilling. "Pierce, tonight you'll learn how far Malcolm Rivers will go to win. And I'm here to make sure you don't survive it." Nia's eyes widened in terror. Jonathan's jaw clenched. The siege had just entered its deadliest stage. The townhouse felt smaller, tighter, almost suffocating under the weight of the siege. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the stillness. Jonathan's heart pounded, muscles coiled like springs as he tracked Vivian Cross moving through the dim hallway. She wasn't just an operative, she was Malcolm's top strategist, and she knew exactly how to exploit weaknesses, manipulate fear, and strike with precision. Nia and Monique huddled together in the corner of the bedroom. Nia's small hands trembled as she whispered, "Jonathan, she's here. I can hear her." Jonathan crouched beside her, voice calm but urgent. "I know, Nia. Stay calm. Don't make a sound. I've got this." Monique squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, trying to steady her own nerves. "Jonathan, we trust you," she whispered. "Please protect us." Jonathan nodded silently, giving them both a reassuring glance before returning to the hallway. He knew the stakes had just multiplied. Malcolm Rivers had brought in his most formidable asset, and tonight, every misstep could be catastrophic. Vivian moved with calculated grace, avoiding the areas monitored by cameras and motion sensors. Jonathan anticipated her path, every instinct screaming that she would attempt a diversion first, draw them away from Nia and Monique, create a false sense of security, and then strike decisively. He signaled Ethan and Rachel, whispering instructions through the earpieces. "She's testing our reactions. Do not engage until I give the signal. Observe, anticipate, and protect the women at all costs." Rachel nodded, eyes fixed on the monitors. "Understood. Every movement is being tracked." Ethan adjusted the layout of barricades, reinforcing doors and windows with makeshift obstacles, preparing for Vivian's next calculated move. Meanwhile, outside the townhouse, Malcolm Rivers coordinated from his SUV. He watched the live feeds from the security breach cameras he had planted earlier. His face was calm, cold, calculating. "Vivian, show them the price of defiance," he whispered, voice low and chilling. Inside, Jonathan's flashlight swept the hallway, illuminating scattered boxes and shadows that could easily conceal a threat. He knew Vivian could exploit every angle, every corner, and every element of the environment to her advantage. The tension in the house was suffocating, the silence between movements deafening. Nia's small voice broke through the tension. "Jonathan, what happens if she gets past you?" He turned to her, kneeling so their eyes met. "Then we fight harder. But she won't get past me. I promise." Nia's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of faith amid her fear. Monique hugged her daughter, whispering words of comfort, even as the dread of the unknown pressed heavily on them. Jonathan returned his focus to Vivian. The strategist had paused near the base of the stairs, analyzing the layout, calculating risks, predicting reactions. Jonathan could feel her presence, a shadowy predator watching, waiting. He tightened his grip on his flashlight and prepared for the moment she made her move. Then it happened. A sudden loud crash echoed from the kitchen, a diversion. Jonathan's instincts screamed that Vivian had created a false target, drawing attention while preparing for the main assault. He moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping across the floor, every muscle tense. Rachel's voice crackled in his earpiece. "She's moving toward the bedroom side. Nia and Monique are her target." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "I know. Stay calm. I've got this." Vivian's shadow slipped along the walls, silent, almost intangible. Jonathan anticipated her path, blocking the hallway, forcing her to adjust her strategy. But she was clever, adapting quickly, using every distraction to her advantage. A tense standoff ensued. Vivian and Jonathan faced each other in the narrow hallway, neither willing to make the first mistake. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and her presence exuded danger. Jonathan's flashlight illuminated her face, but it did little to soften the terror of the situation. Vivian's voice was low, sharp, and threatening. "Pierce, you can protect them tonight, but you can't stop what's coming. Malcolm won't fail, and neither will I." Jonathan's voice was firm, unwavering. "I've protected them this far. And I'm not stopping now. Not while I breathe." Vivian smirked slightly, her eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "Then let's see how far you'll go." Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from the back of the house, a simultaneous assault from another point Jonathan hadn't anticipated. Vivian's eyes flicked toward it, a cruel smile crossing her face. Jonathan's heart raced. Malcolm Rivers' plan had entered its deadliest phase. And this time, the siege wasn't just a test of skill, it was a trap designed to break their resolve entirely. The chaos inside the townhouse had reached a new level. Jonathan's heart pounded as he processed the dual assault, Vivian Cross, Malcolm Rivers' ruthless strategist, moving through the hallway, and a secondary force attempting to breach the back of the house. Every second mattered. One misstep could put Nia and Monique directly in harm's way. Jonathan's mind raced, scanning monitors, evaluating the structural vulnerabilities and calculating his next move. He motioned to Rachel and Ethan, who flanked him silently, eyes wide with focus. "We need to split our attention without leaving Nia or Monique exposed," Jonathan whispered. "Ethan, cover the back entry. Rachel, monitor the hallways and communicate any movement immediately. I'm going to intercept Vivian." Both nodded. The tension was suffocating, every breath heavy with anticipation. Nia clutched her mother's hand, their bodies pressed tightly together. She could hear every sound, the scuff of shoes, the subtle creak of floorboards, the faintest whisper of air moving against a window. Fear was a tangible thing in the room, almost suffocating. Vivian's movements were calculated, each step deliberate, silent, designed to intimidate as much as to advance. Jonathan intercepted her in the narrow hallway, flashlight in one hand, defensive stance tight. Vivian smirked, eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "Pierce, protecting them won't be enough. Malcolm planned for every contingency. And tonight, you'll see why." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "You underestimate me. You underestimate them." The hallway became a battlefield of shadows and strategy. Each maneuver Jonathan made, Vivian countered with grace and precision, testing his limits, probing for weaknesses. Every step she took seemed choreographed, designed to keep him off balance and distract him from the real danger, the secondary force approaching the back of the house. Meanwhile, Ethan had intercepted the intruders attempting the back entrance. The struggle was quiet but intense, silent takedowns, careful movements, every tactic precise. He knew that if even one operative slipped through, Nia and Monique would be in immediate danger. Rachel monitored the security feeds, relaying updates to Jonathan and Ethan with urgency. Multiple points being tested simultaneously. Vivian's maneuvering to draw your focus while the others bypass your defenses. You have to anticipate every move. Jonathan's mind worked like a machine, calculating probabilities, anticipating angles, reading Vivian's body language for even the slightest tell. The hallway felt like a pressure cooker, every second stretching into eternity. Inside the bedroom, Nia's fear reached its peak. She whispered to her mother, voice barely audible, "Mom, what if Jonathan can't stop them?" Monique shook her head, hugging her daughter tightly. "He will. He has to. You have to trust him, Nia. He won't let anything happen to us." Nia swallowed hard, trying to anchor herself to her mother's words. I trust him," she whispered, though her heart raced with terror. The confrontation between Jonathan and Vivian escalated. She feinted left, forcing him to shift, then lunged toward the corner where she believed he was weakest. Jonathan anticipated her strike, countering swiftly, forcing her to retreat. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Clever, but not enough," she hissed. She paused, analyzing, then withdrew slightly, a subtle grin forming. Jonathan's pulse raced. Every encounter with her was a psychological battle as much as a physical one. Her presence was suffocating, calculated to intimidate and destabilize, yet he held his ground. Then came the first shocking twist. A faint beeping sound echoed from the far side of the townhouse, an alarm that Jonathan hadn't anticipated. His heart sank as he realized that one of Malcolm's operatives had planted a device during the earlier diversion. Ethan's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Jonathan, the basement. It's a trap. I repeat, the basement." Jonathan's eyes widened. "Nia, Mom, stay put. Do not leave the room." Rachel's voice cut in, tense but controlled. "We're moving teams to contain it. Jonathan, it's bigger than we thought." Jonathan's stomach tightened. Malcolm Rivers had anticipated the counterattack. They had walked straight into his plan. The siege wasn't just an assault, it was a carefully orchestrated trap, designed to test every limit, to exhaust them, and to force Jonathan into a situation where one misstep could be fatal. Jonathan's grip on his flashlight tightened, his muscles coiled, eyes scanning every shadow. A second later, the alarm intensified, lights flickering across the walls. Vivian smirked from the hallway, her voice cold and taunting. "Pierce, you're out of time. And the real game has just begun." Jonathan realized with chilling certainty. The siege had entered its most dangerous phase. Malcolm Rivers had set the trap, and this time, surviving it would require more than strategy. It would demand every ounce of courage, wit, and resilience they possessed. The alarm in the basement echoed like a sinister heartbeat throughout the townhouse. Jonathan's grip on his flashlight tightened, muscles coiled and ready for action. The dual assault upstairs had been chaotic enough, but this unexpected threat in the basement shifted the balance entirely. Every instinct screamed that Malcolm Rivers had planned this meticulously, an invisible hand orchestrating their every move. "Nia, Monique, stay in the bedroom. Do not leave," Jonathan shouted, voice firm yet controlled. Nia clutched her mother's hand, heart pounding. "Jonathan, what's happening?" Jonathan crouched beside them for a moment, voice calm but urgent. "Malcolm's trying to trap us. Stay put. Trust me." Monique swallowed hard, eyes wide with fear. "Jonathan, what's in the basement?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Something we need to stop before it becomes deadly. I need to go." Ethan and Rachel flanked him as he approached the basement door. Every step was deliberate, flashlight cutting through the shadows. The faint beeping grew louder, echoing through the narrow staircase. Jonathan's instincts screamed that the device wasn't just an alarm, it was an active trap, possibly explosive or designed to incapacitate anyone who got too close. Rachel whispered through the headset, tense but steady, "Be careful. This is beyond a simple diversion. He's escalating." Jonathan nodded. "I know. Let's move." As they descended, the darkness of the basement enveloped them. Water dripped from the ceiling in irregular patterns, amplifying the sound of their cautious steps. Boxes and storage crates were scattered across the floor, creating shadows that seemed almost alive. Jonathan's flashlight swept over every corner, searching for movement, for the device, for any clue Malcolm had left. Ethan moved beside him, eyes scanning meticulously. "He's clever, but we can outsmart him if we stay calm." The beeping led them to a corner where a small metallic device pulsed with red light. Jonathan's stomach tightened. He recognized it immediately. It was an improvised explosive, designed to detonate with pressure or proximity. Jonathan stepped back. "It's rigged. One wrong move and it's over." Suddenly, a shadow darted across the far wall. Jonathan's flashlight illuminated a figure, another of Malcolm's operatives, silently moving to guard the device. Jonathan's pulse raced. They couldn't allow this operative to escape and warn Malcolm, but they also couldn't risk triggering the bomb. Ethan whispered, "We need a distraction. I can draw him away, but you handle the device." Jonathan nodded. "Do it. Be fast." Ethan moved swiftly, throwing a small object across the basement to create noise on the opposite side. The operative reacted instantly, stepping toward the sound. Jonathan seized the moment, carefully approaching the device. He analyzed the wiring, noting the secondary triggers Malcolm had cleverly concealed. His hands were steady despite the tension, every second critical. Back upstairs, Vivian Cross remained in the hallway watching the staircase. She had predicted Jonathan's move, assuming he would try to neutralize the device. But she had miscalculated his precision. A subtle smirk crossed her face, though she stayed silent. Her next move would come once Jonathan acted. Nia from the bedroom whispered, "Mom, what if something happens?" Monique hugged her tightly. "Jonathan's not just anyone, Nia. He knows what he's doing. Trust him." Nia nodded, though fear gnawed at her. Jonathan worked meticulously, cutting wires, bypassing triggers, and using his knowledge of electronics to neutralize the threat. Each moment stretched longer than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the device was disarmed. The red light went dark and the ominous beeping stopped. Jonathan exhaled sharply, relief mixing with adrenaline. "It's done. Device neutralized." Ethan joined him, eyes wide. "That was too close." Jonathan nodded, glancing at the stairs. "And now we prepare for the next wave. Malcolm won't stop here. He's going to push harder and we need to be ready." Suddenly, the basement lights flickered violently. A faint metallic scraping sound echoed, and a shadow loomed near the far wall. Jonathan raised his flashlight, illuminating the figure, another intruder, but not just any operative. The man's face was partially obscured, but Jonathan recognized him immediately, Malcolm Rivers himself. Jonathan's stomach tightened. He had expected confrontation, but Malcolm's direct appearance was unprecedented. He moved with calculated calm, eyes locked on Jonathan. Vivian's voice crackled through the earpiece from upstairs, cold and mocking. "Pierce, the game is far from over. This is where it gets personal." Jonathan tightened his jaw. Every plan, every backup, every strategy would be tested tonight. Malcolm Rivers had entered the battlefield himself, and this time failure was not an option. Malcolm stepped closer, voice low and chilling. "Jonathan, you think disarming my trap makes you safe? You've only begun to play in my world. And tonight, someone will pay." Jonathan's grip on his flashlight tightened. Nia and Monique's lives were directly in his hands, and he realized with stark clarity that Malcolm's most dangerous move was about to unfold, and nothing could have prepared them for what came next. The basement felt colder the moment Malcolm Rivers stepped fully into the light. Jonathan's heart pounded, not with fear, but with recognition. This was the man behind everything. The shadows, the messages, the terror that had stalked Nia's life from the moment she'd whispered for help. Malcolm didn't rush. He never did. He moved like a man who believed the world waited for him. "Well done," Malcolm said calmly, eyes flicking to the disabled device. "Most people panic. You didn't. That's why you're still standing." Jonathan positioned himself between Malcolm and the stairs. "You're finished, Rivers? Law enforcement is already on their way." Malcolm smiled slowly. "Is that what you think?" Behind Jonathan, Ethan stiffened. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan said, voice shaking. "This is over." Malcolm finally looked at him. The smile vanished. "You were never meant to survive long enough to say my name again." The air grew heavy. Malcolm hadn't come to escape. He'd come to assert control, to remind them who held power. Upstairs, Vivian Cross listened through her earpiece, eyes narrowing. Malcolm never revealed himself unless he had leverage. And leverage meant sacrifice. In the bedroom, Nia suddenly gasped, clutching her chest. "Mom, something's wrong," she whispered. Monique's heart raced. "What do you mean, baby?" I feel like he's here. Like he knows me." Monique froze. A memory surfaced, one she had buried for years. A hospital. A research wing. A man in a dark suit watching from behind glass. Her blood ran cold. Back in the basement, Malcolm's gaze locked onto Jonathan with unsettling intensity. "You've been asking the wrong question," Malcolm said quietly. "You keep wondering why I want the girl." Jonathan's fists clenched. "She's a child." Malcolm tilted his head. "She's an asset." Ethan snapped. "You're sick." Malcolm ignored him. "Her mother was part of a medical research initiative, funded by Shell Foundations you helped audit, Pierce. Trials designed to map genetic pain tolerance and trauma response." Jonathan's breath caught. "Nia wasn't supposed to survive infancy," Malcolm continued coldly. "But she did. And that makes her valuable." Jonathan felt rage unlike anything he'd known. "You experimented on them?" "I invested," Malcolm corrected. "And I protect my investments." Upstairs, Monique's knees buckled as the truth slammed into her. "Oh God," she whispered. "Nia, they monitored you when you were born. They said it was routine. They said it was for your health." Nia stared at her mother, tears spilling. "Mom, what does he want from me?" Monique pulled her close, shaking. "He wants to control you. But he doesn't get to. Not ever." The bedroom door handle suddenly rattled. Nia screamed. In the basement, Jonathan's phone buzzed violently. Rachel's voice came through, panicked. "Jonathan, Vivian's moving. She's heading for the bedroom. Now." Malcolm smiled. "That," he said softly, "is the consequence of distraction." Jonathan lunged, but Malcolm was already stepping back into the shadows. "Tick-tock," Malcolm whispered. "Save the girl, or stop me. You can't do both." Jonathan bolted up the stairs. Ethan followed, shouting into his comm, "Rachel, intercept Vivian. Do not let her reach the child." Upstairs exploded into motion. Vivian moved like a ghost, faster than before, no longer subtle. This was the endgame. Nia sobbed as Monique shoved furniture against the door. "Jonathan," Nia cried. "Please?" The hallway lights flickered violently. Vivian's voice echoed through the darkness. "Open the door, and I won't hurt your mother." Jonathan rounded the corner just in time to see Vivian raise her weapon. Time slowed. A gunshot rang out. Nia screamed. Jonathan's heart shattered as he saw a body collapse. But in the chaos, it wasn't clear whose. And somewhere below, Malcolm Rivers smiled, knowing the final choice had just been made. The echo of the gunshot still lingered in Jonathan's ears as he bolted into the hallway. Smoke from the flash of the gunpowder burned his nostrils. His eyes darted to the fallen figure. It wasn't Vivian. It was Ethan. Jonathan's stomach twisted. Ethan groaned, blood trickling from a shallow wound near his shoulder. I'm fine," Ethan gasped, trying to sit up. "Go. Save them, it's worse upstairs." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Stay down. I'll handle this." Vivian Cross had disappeared from the hallway, her figure melding with shadows. She had achieved her goal. She'd distracted Jonathan long enough for Malcolm's secondary plan to begin. Upstairs, Monique struggled to barricade the bedroom door. Furniture and bookshelves pressed against the frame, but Vivian's presence was overpowering. The strategist moved with precision, her movements almost silent as she circled the room, evaluating weaknesses. "Nia," Monique whispered, voice trembling. "Stay close to me. Don't let her see you." Nia's small body shook, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wanted to fight, to scream, but the reality of the danger pressed her into silence. Suddenly, a faint click sounded. Vivian's hand had found a hidden latch, an emergency escape route Jonathan had installed months ago. She pulled the door slightly, testing the barrier. Jonathan burst through the doorway just as Vivian yanked the latch open. The two collided violently, grappling. Vivian's strength and skill were formidable, but Jonathan's desperation lent him a surge of adrenaline. "Get away from them," Jonathan shouted, shoving Vivian toward the wall. Vivian smirked. "You're predictable. You always rush in when they're threatened. And that's why Malcolm wins." Jonathan's eyes hardened. "Not tonight." The struggle lasted seconds that felt like hours. Finally, Vivian was pinned, her weapon slipping from her grasp. Jonathan pressed his advantage, keeping her subdued while Monique and Nia huddled safely behind the barricade. But before relief could settle, a new shock tore through the room. A notification from Jonathan's encrypted laptop flashed urgently. Malcolm Rivers had remotely accessed the townhouse's security system. Every camera, every sensor, every device was compromised. Jonathan's eyes widened. He felt the full scope of Malcolm's reach for the first time. The man hadn't just orchestrated a physical attack. He'd manipulated technology, psychology, and fear into a weapon. A new message blinked on the screen. "Do you really think you've won? The truth isn't here yet. Look deeper, Pierce. You'll see who's been with you all along." Jonathan froze. A chilling realization began to form. Someone in his inner circle had been feeding Malcolm information. Every move, every plan, every counterattack had been anticipated. Vivian struggled beneath Jonathan's hold. "You don't get it, Pierce," she hissed. "Malcolm isn't just watching you. He's been inside your house before, unseen, observing, learning. And he knows what you care about most." Jonathan's mind raced. Could it be? Could Malcolm have had someone inside, someone he trusted implicitly, feeding him intelligence? The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Monique looked at Jonathan, sensing the shift in his expression. "Jonathan, what is it?" He shook his head, eyes dark. "It's not just Malcolm. He's had help from someone we trusted. And until we find out who, none of us are safe." Nia clutched her mother's hand tightly, whispering, "Mom, what does he mean?" Monique's voice trembled. "It means we have to be careful, baby. More careful than ever." Jonathan quickly secured Vivian, ensuring she couldn't interfere while he worked on regaining control of the system. He sent Rachel to check the perimeter and moved Nia and Monique to a safer inner room, far from any possible breach. He paused, taking a deep breath. The adrenaline still coursed through him, but a new determination replaced the shock. Malcolm's network was dangerous, but Jonathan had one advantage: insight. He knew now that the real threat wasn't just Vivian or Malcolm's operatives, it was the unseen betrayal within his own ranks. Jonathan pieced together the messages, the patterns, and the anomalies. One name kept appearing, a person who had been assisting him in securing the townhouse, planning escape routes, and coordinating law enforcement access. And suddenly, it hit him. Rachel Pierce, Jonathan's trusted ally, had been compromised, manipulated by Malcolm. Not maliciously at first, but through blackmail and threats against her family. She had provided Malcolm glimpses into Jonathan's strategy without realizing the full consequences. Jonathan's blood ran cold. He had to act fast. Not just to stop Malcolm, but to protect Rachel from becoming the next victim in a game she hadn't fully understood. Jonathan whispered to himself, voice tight with resolve. If Rachel's involved, whether willingly or not, then Malcolm's next move will come from inside. And this time, we may not see it coming. From the shadows, a soft laugh echoed through the townhouse. Malcolm Rivers wasn't done yet, and the night's deadliest revelation was about to unfold. The townhouse was silent for a brief moment, the kind of tense silence that precedes chaos. Jonathan's mind raced, piecing together every anomaly, every suspicious signal. Rachel's subtle mistakes, the odd delays in communication, the unexplained access points, everything pointed to one shocking conclusion. He turned to her slowly, eyes hard. "Rachel, was it you?" Rachel froze, her hands trembling. "Jonathan. I didn't have a choice." Jonathan's chest tightened. "Don't lie to me. Tell me everything, now." Her eyes welled with tears. "Malcolm, he knows my family. He threatened them. I tried to warn you without him knowing, but every time he intercepted my plans. I swear, I never wanted to hurt Nia or Monique." Jonathan's jaw clenched. Rage, disappointment, and understanding warred inside him. "Do you realize how much risk you've put them in? How close we came to losing them?" Rachel nodded miserably. I know. And I'll do anything to make it right." Jonathan took a deep breath. He had no time for hesitation. Malcolm Rivers had always been several moves ahead. Now, with the betrayal revealed, he had to recalibrate completely. Downstairs, Malcolm watched through his surveillance system, oblivious to Jonathan's realization. The smile on his face was cold, calculated. He believed he still controlled the game. Little did he know, the moment of revelation had shifted the power dynamic. Slightly, but enough. Jonathan turned to Ethan, who had recovered from his wound. "We need to assume Malcolm knows everything Rachel knows. That means he's already preparing for our counterstrike. Vivian is neutralized for now, but Malcolm himself is moving fast." Ethan nodded. "We have to hit him before he hits us again. No mistakes." Jonathan's voice hardened. "Exactly. This ends tonight. One way or another." Upstairs, Monique held Nia tightly. "What's happening?" she asked, voice trembling. Jonathan entered the room, closing the door behind him. "Monique, Nia, listen to me. There's a betrayal we've uncovered. Someone close to us has been compromised. But we know now and we can stop them. You need to stay calm and trust me." Nia's eyes widened, voice shaking. "Oh, Jonathan?" He looked at Rachel, who had tears streaming down her face, nodding solemnly. "Rachel was forced to help Malcolm. But she's with us now. She'll fight too." Nia hesitated, fear and confusion battling inside her. Then she whispered, "I trust you, Jonathan." Jonathan's chest tightened. "That's all I need right now. We move fast, stay focused, and stop Malcolm before anyone else gets hurt." Meanwhile, Malcolm Rivers realized the betrayal had been discovered. His calm demeanor faltered slightly as he adjusted his plan. If Jonathan had identified the leak, the next moves had to be executed immediately, before Jonathan could consolidate. He activated a secondary team, a group of operatives previously hidden, and moved toward the townhouse under the cover of night. This was his final gambit. One clean strike and he could reclaim control. Jonathan quickly outlined the counterplan. "Rachel, you and Ethan secure the secondary entry points. I'll draw Malcolm in. Monique and Nia stay inside and no one moves until I signal. Everyone understand?" They nodded, faces set with determination and fear. Jonathan's heart pounded, but there was clarity. For the first time he felt he had a chance to outmaneuver Malcolm, not just react to him. Vivian, still subdued but conscious, glared at Jonathan. "You think you can beat him?" she hissed. Jonathan looked down at her, voice steady. "Tonight we stop him. You'll be restrained until the authorities arrive. Your boss isn't getting out alive." The hours passed in tense silence. Then at 2:37 a.m., Jonathan heard it, the faintest creak at the rear entrance. Malcolm's secondary team had arrived. Jonathan moved silently, signaling Rachel and Ethan into position. Each step was calculated, each breath measured. They had rehearsed this moment mentally 100 times, but now it was real. Jonathan's mind raced. Malcolm Rivers was ruthless, brilliant, and unpredictable, but he was not infallible. One mistake, one miscalculation, and it would end. He would lose Nia, Monique, and possibly Rachel. Jonathan whispered to himself, "No more mistakes. Not tonight. Not ever." A shadow moved across the hallway. Jonathan's flashlight caught a glint, a weapon aimed directly at him. And in that instant, Malcolm Rivers stepped into view, smiling coldly. "Pierce, it ends now." Jonathan's muscles tensed. Every nerve in his body screamed that the final confrontation had arrived, and that only one side would leave the townhouse alive. The hallway was silent except for the soft hum of the security system and the distant sirens wailing in the streets outside. Jonathan stood, flashlight in hand, eyes locked on Malcolm Rivers, who moved with calculated calm. The final confrontation was here, the moment that would decide everything. "Pierce," Malcolm's voice was cold, low, and terrifyingly calm. "You've played your little games. Protected the girl, protected her mother, but it's over." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "No, Malcolm. Tonight it ends. You don't get to control anyone else's life anymore." Malcolm smirked. "Control? No. I create opportunities. That's all. And you've been a part of them longer than you realize." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Malcolm's smirk deepened. "Nia's survival, her resilience, it wasn't an accident. Every move, every step she's taken, has been part of a design I've monitored for years. And now the final move, you won't see it coming." Upstairs, Monique held Nia tightly, whispering reassurances while their hearts raced. Rachel and Ethan were positioned at strategic points, ready to intercept any attack. The townhouse felt impossibly small, the tension crushing. Every second was a potential disaster. Jonathan moved deliberately toward Malcolm, flashlight casting long shadows across the walls. "It's over," he said again, more firmly this time. Malcolm laughed softly, almost kindly. "You still don't understand, Pierce. This isn't about me anymore. It's about fear. And fear controls people. But you," he paused, tilting his head, "you've taught me something. Courage can be just as contagious." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Malcolm's words carried both admiration and menace. It was the final psychological play, but Jonathan refused to bend. Suddenly, Vivian Cross, restrained but conscious, lunged slightly at Malcolm, attempting distraction. Malcolm reacted instantly, sidestepping, but Jonathan saw his chance. With precision, he tackled Malcolm into a corner, using his weight to pin him against the wall. "You're done," Jonathan said, voice unwavering. Malcolm struggled, but Jonathan's determination and strength were fueled not just by instinct but by something deeper, the need to protect Nia and Monique at all costs. From upstairs, the sound of sirens grew louder. Law enforcement had arrived, alerted to the siege, and the secondary team Malcolm had deployed. Backup was finally here. Rachel appeared beside Jonathan, quickly restraining Vivian. "We've got her," Rachel said, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. Jonathan glanced at Malcolm, whose eyes no longer held menace but a begrudging respect. "You protected them," Malcolm said almost softly. "You were the variable I didn't account for. Congratulations." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "This ends tonight. You won't hurt anyone else." Within moments, officers stormed the townhouse, securing the perimeter, detaining Malcolm, Vivian, and the remaining operatives. The tension that had gripped the home for hours finally began to lift. Upstairs, Monique knelt in front of Nia, hugging her tightly. "It's over, baby," she whispered. "You're safe. We're safe." Nia sobbed, tears of relief and lingering fear streaming down her cheeks. "Jonathan, he was going to, Jonathan knelt beside them. "Shoo, he's not going to hurt you anymore. Ever." Rachel approached, her face pale but determined. She looked at Jonathan, voice heavy with remorse and relief. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. I tried to stop him." Jonathan nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know. You're part of the solution now, and that's what matters." The following days brought a wave of emotional recovery. Malcolm Rivers' network was dismantled, Vivian Cross and the remaining operatives prosecuted, and Nia and Monique finally found the peace they had been fighting for. Jonathan visited them daily, helping Nia rebuild confidence, teaching her that courage didn't mean absence of fear, it meant moving forward despite it. Monique began to heal as well, reassured that the nightmare that had haunted them was truly over. Months later, Nia sat with Jonathan in the park, sunlight streaming across the grass. She had grown quieter, wiser, and stronger through the ordeal. "Jonathan," she said softly, "do you think he'll ever come back?" Jonathan shook his head, smiling gently. "No. Not him and not anyone like him. You've seen how strong you are now. Courage, that's something no one can take away." Monique walked up, hand in Nia's. "And we'll always be together. That's what matters." Nia smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Together?" she echoed. Jonathan looked at them both, heart full. The terror, the betrayal, the near loss, they had survived. And more importantly, they had grown. Later, as Jonathan drove home, he received an encrypted message. The sender was anonymous. "You stopped him this time, but others are watching. Courage spreads faster than fear. Keep Nia safe. The world isn't done testing her." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time he felt ready. With trust, courage, and unwavering protection, the darkness could always be faced and overcome. The end.